This is Bloomberg Businessweek. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine, plus global business, finance, and tech news. The Bloomberg Businessweek podcast with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec from Bloomberg Radio.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Bloomberg Businessweek Weekend Podcast. This past week, politics, Powell, and a pulse on the consumer. As we often do, we have our own takes on it all, plus a story on luminous loos and the rise of bathroom selfies. That to come a bit later on. Coming up this hour, climate change, which popped up a little bit along the campaign trail and at the DNC, the Democratic National Convention this past week. And while many talk about the role of EVs in combating climate change, how about revving up on E-revs, plus checking out how we are all doing courtesy of a shopping basket full of retailer news. And from a member of the Bloomberg Businessweek team, his personal tale with a freak diagnosis that led him on a trail to a better way. All of that to come. We begin with the DNC, which wrapped up this week with Vice President Kamala Harris officially accepting the Democratic nomination for president. Climate change came up a little bit among the many speakers, and while electric vehicles have long been considered as playing a big role on the path to a greener future, this past week, Ford announced a further scaling back of its EV ambitions as it scrapped an all-electric three-row SUV, possibly costing the automaker as much as $1.9 billion in the process. Ford also postponed a next-generation electric pickup and reduced spending on EVs to 30% of CapEx, down from about 40% previously. However, Ford CEO Jim Farley is particularly high on a type of hybrid. It's called extended-range electric vehicles, or E-revs, that have taken off in China. These are EVs that also have a small internal combustion engine on board whose sole purpose is to automatically recharge the battery, and that gives them a whole lot of range. We're talking about more than 600 miles on one charge compared with the typical 300. Sounds great, right? And while Ford's Jim Farley is keen on them, right now, if you live in the United States, you can't get them. To understand why, my co-host Tim Stenovec and I caught up with Keith Naughton, Bloomberg News auto reporter.
You know, a traditional hybrid like the Toyota Prius that's been around for over 25 years, it's primarily run by the internal combustion engine. That's what turns the wheels. And then the car's electrical system and braking, kinetic energy from braking, recharges the battery that's also in a hybrid that supplements the internal combustion engine. But the driver in a traditional hybrid is still the internal combustion engine, and the battery is sort of the backup. These extended range electric vehicles, E-revs as they're known, kind of flip the script on that. They are primarily driven by the battery. They run on electricity about 95% of the time. However, there is a small internal combustion engine on board that is not connected to the wheels. It's only connected to the battery, and it recharges the battery. So if you're driving on a long trip, 300 miles or more, you're going on your vacation, and the battery's running down, the internal combustion engine automatically clicks on and recharges the battery. You don't have to do anything. And you also don't have to stop at a roadside charging station and sit there for a half hour or more while it charges. So it extends your range, up to 700 miles.
This sounds like, okay, holy grail, found. This sounds brilliant, is it not?
It is a very smart solution, and it especially addresses the things that have become roadblocks for pure electric vehicles. Range anxiety, we've all heard about range anxiety, right? That's a big issue in America. It's a big country with not a lot of charging stations yet. And price, because these E-revs don't require as big a battery because you have that internal combustion engine backup. So the battery is about half the size. Well, that lops $4,000 off the price of the car compared to a pure EV.
Okay, Carol's in here.
More affordable.
Carol's in here just saying, brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. Yeah, you might be excited about it, but I know some folks who aren't. The Sierra Club, for example, as you point out in your piece.
So not so great for the environment?
They're saying it doesn't go far enough.
They want zero emission vehicles. They don't consider the Toyota Prius a green vehicle anymore. They believe that if you're not zero emission, you're not helping to solve climate change. Toyota, by the way, has a very different point of view on that. And, when you think about what goes on with these vehicles, they are mostly running in electric power. That means they actually emit fewer global warming gases, carbon dioxide, than a Prius does. So, it is not a pure EV, it is not a zero emission vehicle, and that is the issue the Sierra Club has, but it goes a lot farther than traditional hybrids do right now.
What are the emissions on what are they called? E-revs. E-revs. What are the emissions on them, Keith?
Well, Carol, it kind of depends on how often that internal combustion engine goes on, how often you take a long enough trip to nearly drain the battery and the engine has to kick on. So that's pretty rare. I mean, what automakers tell us is, the average, daily commute for Americans is under 60 miles. So, when you have a 700-mile range on your car, you're not going to get to that internal combustion engine need until deep into that range. So, this, as Jim Farley, the CEO of Ford Motor Company, says, these cars are running on 95% electricity. So, that's far fewer emissions than you would get from a hybrid.
Hey, Keith, help me understand.
Better than what I'm doing right now. Better than what you are doing, Tim, right now.
What, my Subaru?
Sure.
Just saying.
Yeah.
Same with me. Anyway, go ahead.
Still got nowhere to charge in New York City, parking on the street.
It's a little tough.
It's a little bit of a niche issue that only affects New Yorkers, and New Yorkers don't really have cars. Anyway, we're not talking.
But this addresses that, Tim. I know you have a question, but that would address that. The city dwellers, the apartment dwellers who don't have a garage with a charger overnight, they don't have to be plugged in every night.
I love it.
Cars go for a very long distance.
Before I ask you how I get one, which is a long answer because it involves many years.
Moving.
I'm curious about efficiency and when that gas motor does kick on to charge the battery, we think of efficiency when it comes to internal combustion engines here as miles per gallon. How many miles per gallon in battery life do you get when that gas engine kicks on to charge the battery?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question, Tim. It's a good one, but again, it depends on getting to that point where you need the gas engine to click on. I talked to one person for the story who was over in China and rode around with a friend who had an E-rev, for the entire time he was there, and they drove all over the place, and the gas engine never came on.
It's amazing.
I think that's pretty cool.
All right, so here's the question, Carol.
Hurry up, because I got another one.
How do you get one? You got to go to China for now, right?
You got it.
Yeah, move to China, but they are coming. The first one will arrive in the U.S. next year. Stellantis, the Chrysler parent company that also makes Jeep and Ram pickup trucks, has an E-rev version of its Ram 1500 pickup truck. They're going to call it the Ram Charger.
Tim is such a pickup truck kind of guy.
Such an easy thing to park on the streets of Brooklyn.
No problem there. Yeah. Anyway, go ahead. Good with the car seats too for the kids. Anyway, go Keith. Go.
So Stellantis says the Ram Charger will have a driving range of 690 miles. Wow. And they say it's being built, in their words, to pull in an entire skeptical demographic into the electric age, because this seems to be the answer to mainstream buyers' concerns about electric vehicles.
You know what I love in your story, you say America ceded the market for E-revs to the Chinese just as it did a decade ago with battery technology, which China now dominates. I just think about the mistakes that maybe we make as a country, right? In terms of thinking about the technology that we need to be focusing on. And I do wonder, will the U.S. catch up? Is this the way really forward?
It's an excellent point, Carol. General Motors actually pioneered E-revs 15 years ago with the Chevy Volt. I don't know if you remember this car, but it was a small sedan that ran primarily on battery power and had, an onboard internal combustion engine to recharge the battery. They did that. It didn't sell that well. It was expensive to make, so they lost money on every car they sold, and they eventually pulled the plug in 2019 as they were moving away from hybrid-like vehicles and going to pure EVs. GM's now bringing back plug-in hybrids in 2027, but they won't commit yet to saying it's going to be an E-rev. So far, only Stellantis, even though Jim Farley, as I said, expressed all sorts of enthusiasm for E-revs. He has in a couple of different forums since he came back from a visit to China in the spring. Ford doesn't have one that they say is coming yet. Some of this could be related to regulation. It's not clear yet how the U.S. regulators will treat it. It probably won't get the same kind of benefits that a pure electric vehicle will, the $7,500 tax credit and so forth.
Yeah.
So there's a little reluctance from U.S. automakers to field these things.
Yeah, I do wonder, though, something like this, how it might move people to actually say, oh, I can get that. That makes more sense to me. Having said that, you understand this industry so well, and the cycles and the challenges and the move that we've seen over the last few years into EVs in a big way. Do you think this is what we will ultimately see all of the big American automakers focusing on? And maybe it takes a year or two, but this is maybe the route forward?
It does seem like an ideal solution for America, where we have the most range anxiety. And this technology works the best on the vehicles we love most, SUVs and pickup trucks. It lowers their weight, it extends their range. It just seems like a technology that would actually have a consumer pull instead of a regulatory push, which is what we've seen with so much green technology. Everyone I've spoken to about this technology, they're like you guys. How can I get one? People are telling me about the story that, yes, they've read about them and they want to know where they can find one. So Jim Farley calls it an in-between solution, and it is. Maybe it's the bridge to the electric future, whatever. Yeah. But it seems like something that would resolve a lot of the issues that people have with electric vehicles, but still get them to drive one.
And better than a hybrid in terms of impact on the environment.
Yeah. So Keith, if okay, we could get the Ram next year potentially. When's Jim Farley at Ford going to have something out for us? Or is there a chance that we could get some of these Chinese vehicles in the U.S. Anytime soon? I think the answer.
Have you
to
read
that
headlines
is no.
lately?
Yeah.
Seen on election?
I mean, I also read Keith's story, and at the end, it talks about this.
So President Biden wants to put 100% tariffs on Chinese EVs, right, and on Chinese cars in general, and Donald Trump wants to be even tougher. So getting the Li Auto L6 or L9 that I cite in the story and have pictures of, which do wonderful things beyond just having this great range. Getting them here anytime soon, not likely. So it's really up to the automakers in the United States, not just the U.S. automakers, because that would just be GM, Ford, and Tesla, right? But the automakers who operate in the United States, Toyota, Nissan, the Germans, all of them. And by the way, BMW had one too, called the i3, that then they stopped making. So they know how to do it. They just have to come back into the market with it.
All right, everybody, for your barbecue this weekend or next cocktail party, talk about E-revs and read the story.
E-revs.
Unbelievable stuff. I love it.
Very cool.
This, to me, sounds like Answer.
All right, I can see you buying that Ram.
Keith Naughton, thank you so much. Bloomberg News auto reporter joining us there in Detroit.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Businessweek podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business App. Or watch us live on YouTube.
We got a batch of news from retailers this past week. Target ended a string of quarterly sales declines by focusing on cutting prices on essential goods, winning over inflation-hit consumers who are pulling back from other retailers. Meanwhile, Macy's slightly missed analyst estimates for its quarterly revenue and lowered its outlook for sales during the rest of the year, citing increased discounting by competitors and a more cautious consumer. News, too, out of TJX and Walmart as well. For the roundup, Tim and I leaned on two members of the Bloomberg intelligence team, Jen Bartashis, senior retail staples and packaged food analyst, and Mary Ross Gilbert, senior retail analyst.
What Target has really done is they've honed their focus. They've listened to their customers. They've looked at ways to reduce prices and make things more affordable or offer more value to people. And they've mixed up their assortment. They've added new things. They've tried to make things fresh, new, to appeal to those customers. And for the first time in several quarters, we're seeing positive traffic both in stores and online. And that sets them up for a strong second half of the year.
So can we assume that they've kind of changed strategy, or is this just, whoa, we just got it right now? How do we guarantee that this continues, Jen? It's always like, all right, great. What are you going to do for me next quarter and the quarter after?
Yeah, I think this is where actually one of the interesting divergences is where you see where Target is versus Macy's, which is not doing as well. Where Target is pretty good at being quick to pivot and quick to implement strategy. And when you think about things more in the discretionary category, that takes a little bit of time to get the assortment in, get it designed, get it produced, get it in stores, and it's in stores now. And so, I think that what they've got in progress will last for at least another couple quarters. The question, as you said, Carol, is can they stay on top of whatever the consumer tastes change to over the course of that time?
Shrink. This was an issue over the last couple of years for the company. I remember them citing shrink for the reason to close stores in certain parts of the United States. There was some debate whether or not that was actually the reason. Putting that aside, what did we learn about shrink in the most recent report?
Well, shrink is actually getting better.
Okay.
And so,
this is the idea of stuff getting stolen or just disappearing, right?
Exactly. It's things that are either lost to theft primarily or through damage in the store. And so there's been a combination of new technology implemented at the front end when you're checking out to help make sure that people are being upfront and honest when they're using self-checkout. But also it's that the consumer is a little less frantic, and that was leading to some of the theft issues that they were having. So a combination of those, they actually realized more benefit from a reduction in shrink this quarter than they expected. They should receive a little bit of benefit next quarter, but not nearly as much. So the benefits from that coming down is probably realized for the most part and will be less of a tailwind as we go through the rest of the year.
All right. So I think about Target, and I feel like for such a long time they stood out as a retailer, just, innovative, interesting, cool. Who is their customer? And I guess I'm curious about that because how much that is tied to what goes on in the economy.
Yeah, historically, Target's core customer has been sort of that middle-income consumer, and some of the higher part of the low-income consumer as well. And you certainly had higher-income households there, but the core was that middle income. And so, what we've seen is that when Target refocuses on things like value, that resonates with that core consumer. When they are, for example, for back to school, they were advertising $5 backpacks, school supplies, at a discount. Those are things that will help get their core customer excited and back in the store.
Okay, everything taken together, and we're going to talk a little bit later about Macy's and about TJX, but taken together, what do the results tell us about the American consumer, big picture?
When you're looking at these retailers, whether it's Walmart from last week, Target today, these retailers that are serving that middle income, lower income household, what they're seeing is that consumers are still spending, but they're being cautious about what they're spending on. They're making very careful decisions. And so as you've seen some prices come down, for example, we are seeing food inflation easing, we are seeing shelf prices come down for some items. That gives consumers a little bit more flexibility to perhaps get back into some of the more discretionary items. And if you think about it, if you go to a fast food restaurant and a value meal is $15, and you could spend that $15, or you could spend $15 getting 2 t-shirts for your kids at Target, those are the kinds of decisions that consumers are making, especially in that income bracket.
Hey, one last question. Walmart, getting rid of its JD.com in China. How do we need to think about that?
Well, I think this is a strategic exit for Walmart. They traditionally will go into partnerships, learn a lot from their partners, learn how to do things themselves operating in a foreign market, and then take over that execution themselves. I think when you're talking about China, a lot of retailers have become much more targeted in their strategy on how they're going to execute in that market. And to me, this exit from JD.com is really just an amplification of some of the policies and procedures and ideas that Walmart has had with their international business.
All right, great stuff as always. Jen, thank you so much. Jen Bartosha, she's Senior Retail Staples and Packaged Food Analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence.
Okay, so Target shares may be surging, JD not so much, Macy's not so much. This after the company cut its net sales guidance for the full year. It cited a more discriminating consumer and heightened promotional environment. Mary Ross Gilbert is Bloomberg Intelligence's Senior Retail Analyst. She joins us from Los Angeles. We have known that Macy's has been facing struggles for years at this point. What did we learn that investors did not like so much in the most recent quarter?
Well, I think what investors didn't like so much is the fact that they missed their top line estimate. So they were looking for a sales decline, just not to the magnitude that they experienced. So what that meant is that their comp sales, and we're really looking at just the go forward store base because they are planning to shutter 150 locations. But those stores and their nameplate were down over 3% on a comp basis. And the reason, look, Macy's faces secular challenges as an operator. They're less convenient because they're large department stores, and they're facing the competition from more convenient and competitive shopping options. And this includes not only some of the specialty apparel retailers within the mall, but it also means that some of the more promotional or off-price operators, such as a TJ Maxx. So when you just think about the overall competitive marketplace, but also you should note that Macy's is also very promotional. Almost every day they're advertising a promotion. And if you click on Macy's online and then you start to go away, it'll immediate flash, hell, we'll give you 25% off. They don't want you to leave. So they're doing what they can. But the one thing that we did see in their numbers is that this new initiative, which only began in the first quarter with the new CEO, Tony Spring, who came from Bloomingdale's and really right-sided that business. What we did see is that the 50 new stores that they've enhanced, what did they do? They brought back service. Service has been absent from department stores for many, many years. They brought it back in these 50 stores. They enhanced the assortment. So that meant that they brought in new brands like Karl Lagerfeld, Avec L'Ami, Donna Karan, and French Connection, and that is growing sales. So their comp sales lifted 1%, outperforming the rest of the Go Forward stores by 470 basis points. So that's huge. The other thing they did, those stores are brighter, they're cleaner, they have more modernized signing, and then of course they have salespeople in handbags, in shoes, in fitting rooms, and in ready to wear for both men's and women's. And that is really giving them the lift. The problem is they need to move faster and they need to extend it across the rest of the Go Forward stores in order to be successful. So I think what investors are not happy with, it's not moving fast enough.
So Mary, essentially bottom line, Macy's has figured out kind of the secret sauce of what they need to do. They just got to kind of make up the batches and get it out to everybody. Is that essentially they just have to move quicker? Like they've figured it out?
Yeah, Carol, I think they do. I think that's definitely what we're seeing in the first and second quarters with those first 50 stores turning in positive comps. That's certainly what it looks like.
Yeah, because I always think about, I mean, it's the same thing I asked Jen Bartoshis about, you know, when it comes to Target, who is their customer? Who is the Macy's customer, though? Like, I do think about who's shopping at these places.
Yeah, so I would say about half their customer base or more than half their customer base is probably earning less than $75,000. So it's a household income that's being squeezed by inflation. And so that's leaving them with less discretionary income to spend on apparel. One thing that has turned out to be strong and is a good draw for them, of course, is cosmetics. And that's the reason why you've seen them expand the cosmetics presence in all of their stores. Every year it seems like it's been expanded.
And that's Bluemercury, correct?
Yeah, not all of the stores have Bluemercury, but yes, that includes Bluemercury. And of course, Bluemercury, which is more upscale, is also, it's a growing chain for them, and they delivered 2% positive comps in the quarter. So,
well, yeah.
Yes.
Love my lotions and
yeah, from Bluemercury
everywhere. Like, and I'm sure investors love the margins when it comes to anything, whether it's perfumes or cosmetics. It's pretty crazy. Hey, the other thing I do love, I'm Carol Massar, and I like going to TJ Maxx companies. I'm just going to put it out there, and it probably needs some interventions. But having said that, TJ Maxx, we also got some news from them. We got earnings, and they also are taking a stake in a Mideast brand. What do we need to know about this one?
Yeah, so because the company has really created this winning formula. And what that means is there's years and years of knowledge and expertise, plus they've made major investments in their people. So they have longevity with their employees. This includes training buyers. It takes 4 to 5 years, by the way, to train a new buyer, just to give you an idea. So with this expertise, and as they have grown up through the ranks, this gives them an opportunity to continue to grow internationally. They have always had an interest in Mexico. So of course we saw that news after the first quarter, in which they entered into a joint venture with Grupo AXA. So they're going to be able to use the secret sauce in helping those businesses grow, which will make their investments flourish. And so the same thing is going to happen with this latest investment, which is a Dubai-based company operating in the Middle East that operates about 100 brands for less is the name of the store concept in that market. And could we see more? Absolutely, because this is a good use of their cash investing and being able to capitalize on their own expertise and allowing for, some of these executives that they've groomed to be able to have a place to deploy their expertise. So yes, we're going to see more of that. And that just goes to show you that when you're looking at retail, off-price is winning, and TJX being the largest, it's a $56 billion global company, the only one that's global in off-price, and the only one that also has e-com.
Our thanks to Jen Bartashis, Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Retail Staples and Packaged Food Analyst, and Mary Ross Gilbert, also of the Bloomberg Intelligence team. She's Senior Retail Analyst. Still ahead on Bloomberg Businessweek. No easy way to say it. We've got a riveting story on the doctors that cut a giant tumor out of one of our colleagues' head, which led him to investigate and ask, is there a better way? That story's next. This is Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Business Week podcast. Listen live each weekday starting at 2 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business App. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Well, you all know the expression, it's not brain surgery. Well, Carol, sometimes it is. Just ask our colleague Noah Buhire, who just a bit over a year ago found himself on an operating table at the University of Washington as surgeons cut a long upside-down U on his scalp, peeled back the skin, then made a grapefruit-sized opening in his skull through which they could remove a 4-centimeter-wide tumor on the back of his head.
Noah Buhire is Bloomberg News data investigations reporter. He joins us from our Seattle bureau. And for Bloomberg Businessweek, he writes not just about his experience, but also about a renowned neurosurgeon's decades-long quest to develop a better way to eradicate tumors. Noah, first of all, we are so glad you're okay and you're with us to talk about this. What you wrote about, we just can only imagine what that time was like. Before we get to talking about Dr. Neil Cassell, and I hope I'm saying it correctly, tell us about getting your diagnosis, kind of where you were, what happened, and how you had to deal with it.
Thank you for having me on. I mean, it was a rather surreal moment. I was actually traveling for work. I was in Nashville at a conference, and I took a break to go out for a jog one afternoon, and toward the end of my run collapsed with a really large seizure on the downtown streets of Nashville. And when I came to, I took a ride in an ambulance, got a CT scan, and that's when the doctors found this really large mass in the back of my head. And the mass, fortunately, was not cancerous. Correct. Yeah. I mean, if you were going to have a kind of brain tumor, this is the kind you wanted. The pathology later showed that it was extremely slow growing, hadn't metastasized. And frankly, this is the kind of thing that a neurosurgeon wants to see because they know they'll have a high rate of success if they go in there to resect it. Okay, we have quite a bit of time with you, so we're going to sort of go in chronological order here. A little over a year ago, you did find yourself on an operating table. Talk a little bit about the procedure and what you actually went through to have this mass removed. Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the highlights in the intro to the segment. Apologies to folks who don't want to hear graphic stuff, but the basic operation is to make a large incision on your head. Surgeons peel back the skin. They cut through the bone, set the bone fragment aside, do what they need to do to access the area. Then they reattach the section of bone, kind of like a lid to a cookie jar, and then they stitch you back up. After this whole thing, I spent a little bit of time in the hospital and then about 6 weeks at home recuperating. But ultimately, within about 6 months, I was back to many of my normal activities. I had to take a break from driving because of the seizure. But by and large, I'm doing what I used to do. So by all accounts, and I don't want to disparage conventional surgery, it's incredible what the doctors can do. When you get down to it, it's still a rather intense process to have to go through. And that's really what led me to this story. That's exactly why we wanted you to explain what you went through, because what you spend the bulk of the story talking about is how there could be a solution on the horizon that would not require somebody to have this procedure as invasive, as your procedure was. Tell us about what you learned about Dr. Neil Cassell. Yeah, so I learned about Dr. Cassell through actually an interesting connection. I've been on this show in the past. You all, I think many listeners know this, but I used to be the corporate reporter here covering Warren Buffett and Berkshire Hathaway. And more than a decade ago, I wrote a profile of a guy named Ted Weschler, who Buffett hired to be an investment manager at his company. And over the years, I'd been following Weschler's career. And after my diagnosis, I happened to be speaking with him, and I told him what was going on in my life. And he said, "Oh, you should really meet a friend of mine here in Charlottesville where he lives named Neil Cassell." I was in the middle of a lot of stuff, and I sort of blew Weschler off. But 9 months later, I was reading a news story, and I saw Dr. Cassell mentioned, and I thought to reach out to Weschler again, and I started learning about this foundation that it turns out Weschler had helped Cassell start with about $500,000 and then subsequently given many more $1 million to this cause. And the thing you need to know about Cassell, I think he's a very interesting person, is that when he was practicing neurosurgery, he was one of the co-chairs of the department at the University of Virginia, and he was a really well-known stroke doctor. He was the guy that was called in when President Joe Biden, as a senator, needed 2 aneurysm procedures. He was part of the team that operated on Biden. But over the years, he was also really interested in innovative techniques. And about 2 decades ago, he got really excited about the idea of using ultrasound as a way, not as a diagnostic tool, but as something that could actually treat disease. And that's when he turned to Weschler, set up this foundation, and their mission really is to develop new ways to augment and advance treatments for a whole host of really tricky diseases by using a bunch of effects that ultrasound can stimulate in the body.
I have to say, I am a little obsessed with what happened and what you report on. And I'm sure you came across, too, a 60 Minutes piece that was also about the use of ultrasound. And this was basically to open up a blood-brain barrier to help drugs penetrate and help Alzheimer's patients. But also they talked about people with addictions. It just feels like all of a sudden ultrasound is potentially having a moment.
Yeah, I think it's getting more attention because there are starting to be some clinical trials that are yielding interesting results. Now, one of the things I wanted to mention here, and when I went in, I wanted to be skeptical, is because a lot of these studies and applications of ultrasound are still very, very early stage. Mm-hmm. And I just want to make that clear to people because there's an interesting phenomenon that happens when people are pursuing novel medical technologies. There can be a burst of attention and enthusiasm when you have positive results out of these early stage studies. But as we all know, there are an enormous number of hurdles that you need to jump over, both regulatory and technical, to bring a treatment to the level where it's the standard of care. What I think is so fascinating about that is that, in ultrasound more broadly, is that we're not talking about a single therapeutic. We're actually talking about a whole menu of mechanisms that could be helpful in delivering all sorts of drugs that we can't target to the brain for one reason or another. There are also, the main mechanism that ultrasound is being used for and reimbursed for around the world is about heating up parts of the body to basically non-invasively sear a tumor or an area of the body that you want to destroy. But that's just one mechanism of action. Heat is one thing that you can deliver with ultrasound. Another thing you can do is create a swarm of bubbles that in a treatment area that essentially blends up like a blender an area of tissue that doctors want to target.
No, when it comes to bringing a new technology up to the standard of care, such as you describe, what's a way we can think about a timeline that if everything were to go according to plan, this would become available?
Well, I think that's the really interesting thing here. So Dr. Cassell has been for years saying that when he started out nearly 20 years ago, he thought this looked like MRI technology was 35 years prior. Now, we all know what MRIs are now. So many people have had them. If you haven't had one, you know someone who has. So on that timeline, it would suggest that we'd have, real treatments for some of these tricky diseases in the next 15, 20 years. But I think it's going to be disease by disease. For some things, ultrasound's going to work. For some things, it's not. And one of the real tensions that I tried to get at in this story is the real need for optimism and enthusiasm if you're even going to go to the effort of trying to discover these new treatments, but also, the reality of science and getting things approved and becoming standard of care requires an enormous amount of evidence. It involves designing clinical trials that are going to prove beyond a doubt, not just that something works and is safe, but at the end of the day, you want to know that it's cost effective. I mean, that's what the payers from Medicare to private insurers are gonna care about.
What do you think, though, Noah, our audience, who are often looking for like the future trends, right? We talk about AI so much right now, and the GLP-1 drugs, which are really have been a big kind of innovation, it feels like, in certainly the pharmaceutical space and care in the health world. But how do you think our audience should be thinking about what you have found out about potentially what could come from ultrasound, minding you, it could take a while?
Yeah, look, I think it's a space to watch. A lot of the dollars that are being invested right now are coming from private industry, but compared to other kinds of medical technology, it's a relatively small amount of money. But I think one thing to take note is that these aren't silver bullets in and of themselves. Think of ultrasound as one tool that might augment or advance other methods of attacking very difficult to cure diseases.
And can I ask you, is Dr. Cassell the right messenger for all of this? He certainly, as you write in your story, has been great in terms of networking and fundraising, and is certainly out there.
He's an interesting person. He's obviously got an incredible Rolodex and been able to get some well-heeled people and prominent people involved in this effort, and I think that certainly has a place. Many of the people I spoke with said that he's been very important to this field and bringing it to prominence. But at the end of the day, he is a pretty complicated character. He's a very, by his own admission, a tough boss. I think folks who read the piece will get a pretty balanced view of who he is and what he's accomplished.
Sounds like he has a little bit of a sense of humor considering how he ended the story. Can you just share with us what he said to you?
Yeah, not to be too much of a spoiler, but it does tie back to my own experience. So I had my 1-year checkup, and I'm doing great. The tumor's not back, but the place where it used to sit, has grown in size, and it caused a brief moment of worry whether this was going to necessitate another surgery. And I called Dr. Cassell to tell him about this, and he basically said, don't worry, if you're feeling fine, don't have other symptoms, which it's something to be admired. And he said if my editors were worried that I had a hole in my brain, that I should ask them how many other journalists we employ here at Bloomberg who only have half a brain.
On that note, we're going to wrap it up. Listen, incredible reporting. We're so glad, though, that you are well. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Noah Buhire, he's data investigations reporter, killer reporter here at Bloomberg News, joining us from our Seattle bureau. This story is a must-read. Check it out at Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Business Week podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business App. Or watch us live on YouTube.
Plenty ahead in our second hour of the weekend edition of Bloomberg Business Week, including how the U.S. Congress is indirectly helping out the hotel business. Just ask the CEO of Wyndham Hotels and Resorts, which we did, and more. Plus, the streaming wars, the race for content, and leaning on influencers with the CEO of Dolphin Entertainment. And from what top execs drink to unwind after work, to the bathroom selfie, to Jay Powell, are you listening? Because high interest rates negatively affected the sale of vintage cars. Our Bloomberg Pursuits team covering it all. First up this hour, it's a content-crazy world. This past week, Edgar Bronfman Jr. raised his offer to take control of CBS parent Paramount Global to $6 billion, according to a person familiar with his plans, topping his earlier proposal the week before that set off a potential bidding war. Meantime, U.S. domestic box office movies, well, they're still struggling to achieve pre-pandemic revenue status. Our next guest is in the content and entertainment space in a kind of unique way. Bill O'Dowd is the CEO of Dolphin Entertainment. It's a microcap entertainment, marketing, and content production company with a $16 million market capitalization. We begin with a little bit about what his company actually does.
Well, we do three things all in one. We started as a production company, film and TV producers, and we still do that, having just released The Blue Angels with IMAX this spring. Then we started assembling a best-in-class PR and marketing special events, influencer marketing companies around entertainment. And then we started investing in things that we could market, like consumer products. So we're very excited for that.
All right, so talk to us about the quarter and the business. Look back, look forward in terms of, we mentioned the headline in terms of second quarter revenue, specifically in terms of a record. That's according to you guys. Talk to us about a little bit of the business and where the growth is coming from, because you mentioned like kind of these three areas. So where's the growth been? Where's it going?
Yeah, well, we've been blessed with a lot of organic growth. The companies work together, create synergy between, creating campaigns for motion pictures or consumer products that may want both PR and influencer marketing, as an example, or event marketing with influencer, let's say. And in addition, we're going back into production. The Blue Angels was a big hit for us in partnership with IMAX, and that was certainly part of the revenue increase as well.
Well, it's interesting. Well, and that IMAX partnership, how much more can you leverage out of it, right? Like this is something it sounds like that's got some legs, and I'm curious where you take it.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. It's a multi-year partnership. We're used to doing that with Dolphin. We were partners with Nickelodeon for years and years and in making children's content, and have had 50-50 partnerships in the past with Warner's or others. So we hope to be doing documentaries with IMAX for years to come. It's certainly a great partner to do documentaries with, because you can do these big spectacle documentaries, docbusters as we call them, that really deserve to be seen on the big screen, like The Blue Angels.
Yeah, and we, the press release that you guys put out, it talked about, debuting as #1 on Prime Video over the Memorial Day holiday. It grossed over $2 million at the box office, IMAX, and that included a top 10 debut with about $1.4 million in its opening weekend. What did you call it? Docbusters?
That's right. Yeah.
So where else do you go with, do you just continue to do more of that? And how expensive is it to do and build out that content?
Well, documentaries are less expensive than the bigger features, of course. So they typically range in the $3 to $5 million range, let's say, for a theatrical. Obviously, you can make them for less or more. And we do think there's an opening to do one or two of those a year. They certainly program well. There are gaps in the year where there wouldn't be studio content available or fresh studio content to put into IMAX. And also, we think our partnership is expanding into live streaming as well. We could do music specials, Broadway specials, comedy specials, one night only type things that would really juice, we hope, the box office, especially midweek.
When do you start to do something like that, or what's involved in getting into that area more aggressively?
We hope to launch that in the first quarter of next year, and IMAX has already been doing some of that themselves, and it's a natural extension of our partnership to go into that content together.
What's the challenge in all of this? Because I do feel like, Bill, I think it's safe to say, we cover this a lot at Bloomberg, that, there's a lot of places to view content. There's a lot of content creators, but there's a lot of people vying for that content. So what's the stuff that really you think moves the needle in terms of engaging with the consumer? Because I know I get to a point where I'm just overwhelmed and I'm done and I pick up a book and read. But I just wonder, right? You've got to kind of read through a lot of stuff.
You sure do, and I like reading too, so I understand completely. And I think a lot of people try and thread the needle by thinking about what would work best in which type of delivery. When you talk something like an IMAX system, then and network, then you want that spectacle, something that warrants people coming out and spending the money. On the smaller screen and the streaming wars, you're seeing a lot of people look for different types of content. And if you think about the last 10 years, the rise of documentaries or true crime, especially on the small screen, has really exploded.
What about, you mentioned live sports, Broadway comedy, or you mentioned Broadway comedy. What about sports in terms of live streaming? Or is that just too expensive, already crowded? The big boys, the big guys are in it.
I think certainly sporting events, it's probably crowded. And those rights only seem to be going up and up, right?
Yeah.
But we do like sports content generally quite a bit. And you're seeing a lot of opportunity this year around women's sports. And that's an area that we really like. We think female athletes have been underserved tremendously. And with our influencer marketing companies, we think we could expand and bring brand sponsorship deals and just generally income to female athletes from speaking engagements, et cetera.
You mentioned the influencers, and I thought that was really interesting. I know you've got a relationship with Glow Lab. You are thinking about the younger audience. I mean, first of all, a couple things. What is your target audience, or you don't care? You want to go all over the kind of age spectrum?
I think with influencer, you can broaden out. We started with the core, which female 25 to 44, let's say, beauty, wellness, fashion products. But the thing about influencer marketing, it's grown double digits year over year. Some years, I think, triple digits, simply because there is no one demo anymore.
Yeah.
And the marriage of influencer with sports it was going to come anyway, but it certainly accelerated 3 years ago with the Supreme Court ruling, name, image, likeness for college athletes. And now this generation are influencers, this generation of athletes, right? You could just see Simone Biles taking selfies at the Olympics or get ready with me videos at the Olympics. And that if you're talking athletes 15 to 25, they're digital natives for sure.
Well, when you think about the work with influencers, as you said, I mean, you also want to be creating the products that they're involved in, or talk to us about how you kind of drill down into that relationship, which I would assume then opens up even another revenue stream for you guys.
It sure does. Thank you. Yeah, it's really marrying a couple of different aspects of our business. We financed and produced television and film for 20 years prior to going public. We're used to project finance. And then when you marry that with the rise of social media and influencer marketing, then it's really just applying project finance to consumer product. We could develop and bring to market consumer products where our form of marketing, especially in entertainment, will give us a better chance of success. So when you think about beauty, cosmetics, as an example, those are products where influencers and celebrities have long influenced success. And so we think there are certain product categories like alcohol where the marketing of the product is as important as the manufacturing and the distribution itself.
But it'd be great if you get a piece of both, right? Going forward?
That's right. That's right.
Hey, Bill, one thing I did want to ask you when we were talking a little bit of nuts and bolts in terms of the quarter, you are a microcap company. We don't on Bloomberg talk a lot to companies that are below $1. And I am curious what you get from investors. Stock's down about 60% year to date. What do you hear from your investors, and what are your aspirations? Is there something about, I understand sometimes we start small, we get bigger. What are your aspirations for this company? And what do you hear from your investors?
Sure. Yeah, no. Well, the microcap environment as a whole, as I'm sure you know, Carol, had a tough year.
Yep.
We've posted record quarterly revenue 3 quarters in a row. So, and positive adjusted operating income. So we're hopeful and confident that will be rewarded in the market, especially as a microcap, doing real revenue with real business.
So is it just investors saying, listen, we get it, it's the environment, or what do they want to know about your business in particular? What are the questions you get most from investors?
Yeah, I'd say it's mostly about the environment. numbers don't lie in terms of what we're doing in revenue and adjusted operating income, and we're beating our own projections, including the analyst projections out there. So there's a sense of frustration with some that, they just wish that, we weren't being lumped in with some of the others, but, we just have to stay the course. I mean, a microcap that's doing 50 million in revenue and a $16 million market cap, you'd like to believe that you're about to pop back.
When you look at the environment, and I think it's, Bill, it's an interesting one. We're very focused on, what's going on in terms of Fed policy, what's going on in terms of economic data. We talked a lot by the end of the week about a soft landing, and it looks like things are, kind of working out fairly well. Not all Americans certainly feel that. We talk a lot about the differences between the top and the bottom in terms of the economic strata. Having said that, when you look at the environment, you're doing deals, you're doing different things. How do you describe the U.S. economy right now?
Well, we're hopeful for the rate cuts. Just I think, like a lot of people, will free up cash and discretionary investment into the microcap world, small cap world generally, right? I think you hear a lot of people talk about that. We're not as susceptible to some other companies in terms of the interest rates. We've fixed ours in commercial paper already, so we feel good about our position. But certainly lower interest rates, or lower Fed rate, would certainly benefit the microcap world for sure.
All right. Yeah. No, we talked about that actually earlier in terms of small caps and the importance of economic growth, as well as in terms of the interest rate environment. Bigger, broader picture. We've spent a lot of time talking about kind of what happens to some of the big media players. We talk about streaming so much. You are in the content business. What do you make of all of what's going on in the streaming world? It's a lot of competition for all of our eyeballs, and there are obviously some very clear winners and some that are having a tougher time.
Yeah, and we're blessed where our film and television PR firm, 42 West, works with almost every major streamer out there, and we promote shows on so many different platforms, from Netflix to Amazon to Hulu and Paramount Plus, et cetera. So we see a lot of them contracting some in terms of investment, as I'm sure you've talked about quite a bit. But the sheer volume of programming the last few years has been overwhelming to a lot of consumers, I think, and probably this is for the best. And
so you don't care kind of who wins, because you get to work with them all, right? Is that fair to say? But I wonder, do you think that there will be, because you do see some that might be struggling or slowing down a little bit, that there'll be some kind of shakeout?
There has to be. One would think, and certainly the conversations out there about M&A among some of even the bigger studios, right, isn't idle speculation. So there'll be a right sizing of the ship, I think, and the industry hopefully will be stronger for it.
So what's kind of interesting when you look at the content and media world and you look out, we talked a little bit earlier about influencers and your work with Glow Lab, and it is interesting in a week where, again, Warren Buffett, we saw his stake in Ulta Beauty. We talked about it through the pandemic and out of the pandemic, that whether it was Sephora or some of the other names, that, people spend. It's not just cosmetics, it's all kinds of beauty and, skincare and so on and so forth, that spending kind of continues. You guys also work with Rachel Ray, so chefs are something that's certainly on your radar. When you think about growth areas for content, if you had to whittle it down to one thing, what would it be? There's also AI, right? So the creation of whatever that content will be.
Yeah, and AI is unstoppable, right? Yeah. We take a positive spin on it, certainly. But, I think when you take a step back and you think the world before and after the rise of social media, you can make a case that what it's done through the explosion of what used to be, remember when it was mommy bloggers and then it became influencers and now it's creators, you could make an argument that's democratized the ability to launch certain types of consumer products. Early in my career, you would need, tens of millions of dollars of paid media to just get awareness of the U.S. consumer. Today, you've got influencers launching their own skincare products and selling the companies 3 years later for over $300 million, as Susan Yara and Glow Lab did with Naturium to e.l.f. Beauty. So, that's unfathomable, 15 years ago, 10 years ago. So we see a lot of potential using influencer marketing and PR, earned media generally, to launch and content on those channels to be able to drive traffic. That's on the consumer product side. Of course, on the pure content side, I think it raised a lot of eyebrows in the last week or two, that on television sets, YouTube gets more viewing than Netflix. And I think that raised a lot of awareness, outside of our world, just how big social media is to all demographics and not just, the YA.
Listen, right now, you are on YouTube. We don't get to see your face right now. You're on the phone, but if you were on Zoom and so on and so forth, I mean, right now, simulcast on radio, we're on YouTube and we're on our streaming service. And then earlier, we're also on television. So it's just interesting, like the different venues. I watch a lot of YouTube channels. There's some interesting stuff, very niche programming. If you had to pick one, whether YouTube, TikTok, or some kind of delivery service that you think is really going to be or continue to be the most influential and just got about 20 seconds, what would it be?
YouTube.
Hands down. Hands down.
Hands down. It can do both short and long form, and it's already got the mass.
All right, great stuff, as always. Listen, thank you so much, Bill O'Dowd. He's founder and chief executive officer of Dolphin Entertainment, joining us on this Friday in Miami.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Business Week podcast. Listen live each weekday starting at 2 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business App. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Wyndham Hotels and Resorts has some 25 brands in about 95 countries and 9,100 plus hotels, and this past week it opened up another one, the Echo Suites Extended Stay by Wyndham Dallas Plano Frisco, the second extended stay Echo property to open in the United States. With more on that and a look at the leisure and business traveler, my co-host Tim Stenovec and I checked in with the president and CEO of Wyndham Hotels and Resorts, Jeff Bellotti.
This is the first hotel that a developer by the name of Ian McClure of Gulf Coast Hospitality is based here in Texas. Texas is a very important state for us. He's building 25 of these Echo Suites by Wyndham. The demand for this type of product is incredible. It's a very comfortable room. It's our fastest growing brand because of the demand that's out there.
Well, tell us about that, why it is your fastest growing and what is the demand specifically? Who wants to stay there? Who's demanding like, hey, we need these kind of places?
Gosh, last month I was sleeping up out in Spartanburg, South Carolina, where Spartanburg has received $1 billion of the $9 billion that state, that single state, has been awarded of this one so far of this $1.5 trillion piece of legislation, the most historic piece of legislation this country's ever seen. There are 1.8 million companies that are contracting their workers for projects that are now just beginning to get started, and they're looking for this type of affordable, clean economy accommodation to put them in. I mean, here in Plano, perfect example, there is so much development going on around the community here that I'm in today, and that I'll be this evening with developers looking to build more of these and other brands from the medical profession, from the automotive profession, and a litany of projects that haven't yet begun that are going to begin soon. And companies are out contracting right now for lodging accommodations like this. It really is. It's an amazing, I've been in this industry for 30 years. I've never seen anything quite like it.
It's really fascinating. I'm just kind of going back to what you kind of kicked off with. So you're talking about the spending bills and the legislation that's come out of the U.S. Congress, and that is really shaping kind of where you develop.
Exactly. I mean, our teams have identified about 4,000 of the 40,000 projects that will be funded by the $1.5 trillion bill and the $250 billion CHIPS Act bill. Those CHIP Acts, that bill has begun funding projects here in Texas as well. We have this is our 691st hotel that we've opened as a company. But in Taylor, Texas, Samsung is building a chip plant, where they will spend $17 billion over the next 10 years. And they have thousands of workers right now who are looking for long-term lodging accommodation. They're checking in for 5, 6, 7 months. Some are checking in for over a year. Many are from other parts of Texas and driving home on the weekends, but they want a place that they could cook, put their dishes in a full-size dishwasher, have a full-size refrigerator, and a great microwave. They want a place that feels like home, and that's what's fueling Carol the demand.
You know what? Does it feel like Waterville, Maine, Jeff? Which is, I'm just now learning, where you and I both went to college, a small school called Colby, where we found ourselves freezing pretty much November through April every year, holed up in our dorm rooms playing beer pong because it was so cold in Maine.
It's Maine.
I know.
They have, what, 1 month of summer?
Tim, I don't know if you've been back to Waterville lately, but it has been transformed. The development that's going on in downtown Waterville is really impressive to see. And I was thinking to myself, that's why I'm smiling so widely, that Waterville needs an Echo Suites extended stay by Wyndham, because we would kill it in that market, as you know, with parents who did not have the lodging accommodations when we were there that are available today on the new construction route.
Yeah, just so everybody knows, it's an old mill town that, like many mill towns in New England, had fallen on hard times years ago. The college and the hospital, at least when I was there in Waterville, Maine, were the biggest employers. And you can see it, but since I've been there, I graduated close to 20 years ago. And there has been incredible development in the area, really a revitalization of downtown.
All right. So I'm curious, though. So exciting growth development. But what happens, I don't know, when the money kind of runs out in terms of the development from like legislation? Do you worry about that you won't have the people who will be demanding these kind of rooms in Plano, Texas, or elsewhere throughout the state?
Carol, that is a long time away. I mean, we are in the very early innings. Less than 20%. I think the figure from the CLB is less than 17% of the 1.5 trillion has been allocated. And even a smaller percentage of that has been spent in terms of shovels on the ground. The projects that you and Tim are probably hearing about and reading about, I mean, you think about big projects in the New York area, like the Hudson Tunnel, those projects are so far out there. This is certainly helping us from a demand standpoint, demand generation standpoint. I mentioned that we've identified 4,000 of those 40,000 projects so far, and there'll be thousands more that will be funded. But that is a long, long way away. I'm not thinking that far out. It's at least 10 years, and who knows in 10 years what's to come in terms of new projects that could be funded. There is, again, just such a lack of demand for this type of extended stay lodging product, and that's what has our 270 developers who have signed contracts and been awarded territories to build this type of lodging so excited.
So you don't ever say the word right now, recession, based on what you're seeing. Is that fair?
Well, look, I mean, our brands have always outperformed any economic downturn. They did after 9/11. They certainly did during the 08 and 09 great financial crisis. And there was no better outperformance in the industry than the economy and mid-scale lodging brands of Wyndham Hotels and Resorts throughout COVID. Our brands were the very first to recover. Our brands are known as Days Inn by Wyndham, Super 8 by Wyndham, La Quinta by Wyndham, very large systems of thousands of units in this country that have great brand recognition, where franchisees never had to close their hotels because they were able to break even at 30% occupancy. While we're a leisure-based company and 70% of our business is reliant on the leisure travel demand, which is still buoyant and still out there, that 30% that is non-leisure is that essential everyday worker whose office is not a downtown office building that's been closed as it was throughout COVID, but whose office is the front seat of their construction or utility vehicle, or is one of my traveling nurse daughters who have to go to work that are traveling and need accommodation during the week. Again, our brands have always outperformed.
Right.
In economic downturns. We're not seeing a recession, to your point, right now, and we're feeling very confident about the year ahead.
Jeff, just remind everyone of Wyndham Hotels and Resorts business model. Are you 100% franchise owned and operated, i.e. you guys actually don't own and operate any of the Wyndham resorts and hotels that people see?
Exactly, Tim. And that's what investors wanted to see. When we went public 5-6 years ago, they wanted to see a company that got out of the ownership game. We had owned hotels at that point in time, out of the management game, which we have. We are a 100% franchise company. We're the world's largest hotel franchise company. We franchise about 6,000 hotels here in the United States and another 3,295 countries around the world.
So it's less risky, right?
Oh, completely. Our business model is extremely resilient. As we were talking about in periods of downturns, we've actually been able to, even in periods where revenue per available room might dip, generate more earnings for investors. We have many levers to pull.
One thing I'm curious about, and the levers, like you have lots of different brands and you hit at different, economic individuals or families or consumers. So I am curious about, I was looking at some of the BI research our team does, and it talked about your U.S. room base, including a larger percentage of lower price economy hotels than other lodging companies. You did, though, buy American Inn and La Quinta, and that La Quinta. I know, sorry, you're right. That really helped boost your mid-scale and upper mid-scale presence and fee exposure. But I do wonder that you do have some exposure if there's a downturn, an economic downturn. So you sound upbeat. We talked about that before, but there is some exposure, right? If especially the lower income consumer who continues to be squeezed. And we talk about that a lot here at Bloomberg.
I think one of the biggest misnomers is that our guest is low income. It is squarely middle class when you look at the demographics of our guests. And those middle class income Americans who are staying at American or La Quinta or Days Inn or Super 8 are feeling better about life today than they were certainly in the middle of COVID or pre-COVID levels. And the consumer sentiment that we're seeing continues to improve. We look at many leading indicators in terms of how we believe the consumer is feeling. Booking windows continue to increase. People have reprioritized their vacations as to the very top of the list. They want to spend their disposable income on vacations more than on any other consumer spend. We're seeing longer lengths of stay, and certainly the ability for so many of our consumers to work remotely on a Monday and Friday is helping drive that trend. And we're seeing demand continue to pick up after the normalization of that revenge travel that we all knew had to normalize. So we're seeing the start of we're heading towards obviously Labor Day, but Memorial Day was very strong. It was up 4% versus last Memorial Day here in the United States. July 4th, AAA reported was up 8% versus where it was versus last July 4th. And we're expecting the same for Labor Day. So these middle income Americans want to travel. The number one preference for vacations in the United States of America is drive to, and 90% of our business is drive to. And these middle income travelers are, with unemployment where it is, as we all know, more employed than they were. And most have more savings in their bank accounts than they did pre-COVID.
So Jeff, help us understand the segmentation, because Echo is for the economy traveler. That's where where you are right now.
Well, and the economy business travel.
Okay.
Is squarely blue collar.
Waterwalk is upscale. More upscale, and then you have Hawthorne and mid-scale. Give us sort of the price point for Echo versus Waterwalk.
Yeah, I mean, price points obviously are determined by the markets and the location they're in. But the guest room I'm in tonight, we'll be checking guests in at an $80 price point. That Waterwalk average daily rate could be, depending on the market, double that. And sure, we have lots of aspirational Wyndhams, Wyndham Grands, Dolce. We have a new luxury brand, the Registry Collection, which might have a $300 or $400 handle to its average daily rate. But for that blue collar traveler who's staying at an Echo Suites, it is by and large often being paid for by their employer, Also the demand for this type of product is being driven by how much transient motion there is out there in our country for people looking for short-term and medium-term and long-term accommodations on the relocation front, given the lack of housing in this country.
Hey, one thing I want to do, what's cool is you guys are global. Your second quarter RevPAR, so we're talking about revenue per available room, so key when we're talking about anybody in the hospitality industry. Second quarter RevPAR was flat for the U.S., down 2% for economy hotels, up 7% internationally, and you had a 37% gain in Latin America and 15% in Europe and Middle East, Africa. What can you tell us about kind of the global economy based on what you guys are seeing?
The biggest trend for all of the lodging companies out there for the next quarter, the quarter ahead, and the year ahead is still there is a lot of occupancy still left to recover. Mm-hmm. The occupancy tailwind really around the world, with very few exceptions, country by country, still has room to grow. And so, yes, international was a big bright spot for us. Our international RevPAR, revenue per available room, was up 7% in the quarter versus same time last year. And here, where things normalized, economy, as you pointed out, was down, but it was improving from where it was last year as things normalized, and it was up in some of the other segments. There's great pricing power out there, Carol. I always remind investors that pricing still hasn't caught up in the lodging industry to inflation. I think inflation's up something like 23, 24% pre-COVID days, and our average daily rate is up over only 17%. Our hotels are operated by small mom and pop business owners who feel very confident about holding on to that average rate that they gained during COVID and continuing to improve it. But at the same time, building the business, the base of business on the book with a business transient that allows them in periods of demand to price up.
Jeff, great to check in with you. Really appreciate it. Jeff Bellotti, he's the president and CEO of Wyndham Hotels and Resorts, joining us from Plano, Texas. Jeff, be well. You're listening and watching Bloomberg Business Week.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Business Week podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business App. Or watch us live on YouTube.
Vintage car collectors downshifting their spending, the C-suite drink of choice, and marble-tiled floors spread out like flower petals while painted vines cascade from the ceiling over a glowing circular sink. Yes, it's all in a bathroom, the perfect setting for a selfie. Yeah? All right, you're going to find out about why. Yes, it's time for Bloomberg Pursuits, and with us is the editor of Pursuits, Chris Rouser. We got to start with this whole idea of selfies in a bathroom.
Carol,
you're laughing.
Didn't you know that the most important room in a restaurant these days is the bathroom?
How did that, explain, please.
Well, it's actually a crazy story. So Kate Crater, our amazing food editor in London, pitched this story, and
were you like,
no. I mean, yes. She and I always have this. My number one bugaboo is when a restaurant bathroom doesn't have an occupied vacant signal on it, and you have to knock, and then you can't hear the person. Anyway, so we talk about restaurant bathrooms a lot, and now that Instagram is such a big part of restaurants' success and their marketing, because people take food selfies, they do the lighting in the restaurant so the food looks good in pictures. It obviously extended to people are in the bathroom, they're taking selfies in the mirror. The bathroom is actually a place where you can, for not a lot of money, express your design sensibility and your care for every small detail. So suddenly bathrooms are looking very cool and very shareable. And so David Rockwell, who is a very famous architect, and he does restaurants and hotels and all sorts of cool stuff, Broadway shows. A couple of years ago, he did a story with us where during the pandemic, he was like, we need to envision the restaurant of the future. What will restaurants be like now that maybe we need to use outdoor spaces, maybe they need to sort of work more 24 hours a day rather than just at dinner. And one of his ideas in this schematic of a restaurant of the future was you walk into the restaurant and there's a hand washing station. The bathroom is kind of the first thing that you get to. So that was an idea that we ran in Bloomberg Pursuits.
I have to say, I do like that because sometimes, especially in the city, right, you just feel you just walk outside a little bit and you're like, I want to wash.
So now when you get into Kogodok, which is one of the most fabulous restaurants in New York City, it's so cool. You can't get in. It's this fried Korean chicken and champagne restaurant. The first thing that you see when you walk in is a hand washing station. And it's got like Hermes soaps, and it's very fancy, and it's got these great lighting, mirrors for like selfies.
It's stunning.
And that idea came from like working with us on that Pursuit story.
That's
and
cool.
It's very cool. And anyway, all over Europe, the US, restaurant bathrooms are becoming very trendy and very shareable.
Yeah, it's not just a New York thing, right?
No.
It's like all over the place. First of all, though, you have to remind everybody, for those of you out there listening who want to do your own bathroom selfie, I mean, tons of people have done this, like millions.
Oh, yeah. I mean, 9 million bathroom hashtag bathroom selfie hashtags have been shared. There's one of our colleagues was in Georgia's Trattoria in Munich and sent me pictures of this disco ball bathroom. There's a roller rink / restaurant in Brooklyn, of course, that has a DJ in the bathroom. It's called Club Flush. So anyway,
listen, the DNC used a DJ like for the roll call. Apparently DJs are finding themselves everywhere. All right, for executives who often travel around the globe, they have busy days, CEOs, just like the rest of us, they've got to unwind after work.
Yeah, so in every issue of Business Week, every month we do a CEO diet where we ask a bunch of CEOs what they do for exercise, what they wear to work, what they eat for breakfast, which we've talked about.
Right.
And so this month we asked them what is their signature drink, like what's their go-to. And I got to say, it's a lot of martinis. We couldn't run all the answers that we got.
Come on, people, you couldn't be more creative.
A lot of them were dirty martinis. But Jen Hyman, who's the Rent the Runway founder, she was like, I love a spicy margarita, but on a cold, cozy Brooklyn day, I love a mezcal Negroni, a Negroni with mezcal, which I think is great.
Yeah.
And then we got some Aperol spritzes.
Kind of love an Aperol spritz.
Yes, yeah.
Can I just say there was a lot of non-alcoholic too. Beverages, which I thought was interesting.
That did not surprise me at all.
If Tim was here, because he's a huge non-alcoholic dude.
Yeah. Sort of like nootropic kind of drinks that are sort of wellness-oriented and have no alcohol. That was also popular.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of interesting, I really feel like. All right. Can we get to... You're a watch person.
Mm-hmm,
I mean, you're a person of many interests.
But I love watches.
But you love. This was just kind of a fun story. I do this, like, I don't know about you. I've come off a plane and I see somebody wearing something and I'll stalk them and be like, hey, where'd you get that?
Yeah, I'm the same. I will walk up to anybody and ask them about their watch.
I know.
And so for my watch, so I have a watch club, which is we have a newsletter and we have events. And if you're a Bloomberg subscriber, you can be in our watch club. And
so what do you do? Like, who do you contact or how do you reach out to you? I have no idea.
If you Google,
shameless promotion,
website,
but we love Chris, so we're going to do it.
It's if you go to Bloomberg.com/accounts/newsletters, you'll see it.
Okay.
Or just Bloomberg.com/newsletters, and you'll see it. But anyway, I was walking around, and in summer, there's not a lot of new watches actually, because Europe goes on vacation. There's not a lot of new debuts. So I was kind of looking out for the watches that were in the wild, and I saw some really, really cool ones walking around this neighborhood in Manhattan. But also I ran into a guy who had a 1920s Rolex on the boardwalk in Fire Island. And he found it and he restored it, and I put it in the newsletter. My friends from Rolex were like, we've never even seen this watch.
It's so cool.
And this surprising watch is also extended to the Olympics, where there were a crazy amount of watches. People running, doing sprints, like competing in $185,000 Richard Mille watches. The guy who won the pole, who like set the world record for pole vaulting, Armand Duplantis, he broke his own record. He's broken his own record 9 times. He was wearing a new Omega watch. Like Omega hadn't debuted this watch yet, and the way they debuted it was they put it on his wrist as he won the gold medal at the Olympics. First of all, why are you wearing anything extra?
I don't get that. I don't get that.
Could slow you down. And it's interesting. So LVMH was like the sponsor of the Olympics in France, and there was a lot of like LVMH brands. And so the other brands mostly were like, this isn't our time. First of all, the Olympics is usually like a non-sponsored event. Kind of.
Right. That's what it used to be.
But some brands like Omega and Richard Mille were not afraid, and they put their watches on Olympics on Olympians in competition, which was crazy.
I mean, that's like killer advertising.
I mean, you couldn't. I couldn't believe it when I watched it live with my daughter, and I was like, "Oh my God, he's wearing a watch! I wonder what that watch is."
It's unbelievable. Hey, listen, just we're going to transition because I want to talk about a story that Hannah Elliott. Real quickly, though, there was some news this week about Chanel buying a minority stake in the Swiss watch brand MB&F. You know this brand?
Yes. So Chanel makes great watches, and not everyone knows that because you think of them as they're leather goods, they're fashion. But they also have a great watchmaking tradition. And to sort of improve their legacy in that field and their authority, they bought a 25% stake in MB&F, which is a very cool, very avant-garde watch brand. They only make like 400, 500 watches a year. They're really expensive. Yeah. I own one that it was not really expensive, but I entered a lottery.
New window into Chris's life.
I entered a lottery to be able to buy one of these watches because they're like spaceships. We've talked about them before. They're really, really crazy, and I got their like lowest price one, and I only wear it on special occasions, but it's very
Next
cool.
time you have it on,
it's interesting that Chanel did this.
Can I see it and just look at it and glance at it? All right. Speaking of things that often have high prices, though, vintage car sales, and we want to bring in Hannah Elliott, who covers all things auto for us. She's our auto columnist here at Pursuits. You're a member of your team.
Yes.
Hey, Hannah, good to have you here. Tell us about the recent auctions at Monterey, because it sounds like, I love the headline on this, vintage car sales getting freezer burn. What happened? And tell us about the environment, like who's there, what you usually see, and how it went down.
You know, it was a really interesting year this year at the auctions. Week-long totals closed around $370 million across 5 auction houses. And that was down about 8% from 2023. And it was well off, you know, like just after COVID in 2021 and 22, the auction numbers were like way up above $450 million. So things are down. And that freezer burn term is really interesting. Ouch. One of my sources used it because he was describing sort of the glut of cars for sale that had already been for sale and had just sort of been defrosted and like, let's try it again because they hadn't sold. And that kind of describes this market we're in right now, which is there are a lot of good cars out there and maybe too many good cars right now for how willing collectors are to buy. So you asked about what kind of people are at the auctions. Now, of course, this is Monterey Car Week. This is like the Olympics of the car world that happen every August. And it's global collectors. It's a lot of course, we're talking vintage cars, but also, you know, vintage now includes cars from the 90s and 2000s, which kind of pains me to say because I'm a 90s child. But those are considered vintage too now. So we have people buying, of course, the old racing Ferraris and old Rolls Royces and Alfa Romeos, but we also have people buying like Lamborghinis from the 90s and 2000s. So it's a mix. And what we saw was, I don't know what to say. No one was saying panic, but things are slowing down.
It's an interesting time in this collectibles market across categories, actually, watches too, and art, obviously. And Hannah talked about this on her great podcast, Hot Pursuit. People don't know what's going to happen with interest rates. Maybe now is not the time. You know, even very, very rich people are affected by interest rates when it comes to real estate and buying art and just borrowing and the way their money moves. And also people don't know what's going to happen after the election. And, you know, like, where are you going to put, Hannah made this point, like, where are you going to put your money? What's the world going to look like? Where are you going to live? It's a strange time at that high end of this collectibles market for sure.
Yeah, and I would also say for cars, too, just the geopolitical climate in Europe it affects how things are moving in Europe, and there is a trickle-down effect to how things are moving in the U.S. For instance, some of these cars, some of the big, you know, Ferraris and Alfa Romeos, those are actually cars that have lived most of their life in Europe. And if things aren't really moving right now in Europe because of obvious reasons, we've got some wars happening, that does have a trickle-down effect to some of the sales in the U.S., too.
I really love, too, that you get into how it's kind of a transitional market for cars, I guess, the really old, great vintage cars from the 50s and the 60s, but that some of the newer stuff actually is what is selling. Is that kind of a fair takeaway?
Yeah, that's a really fair takeaway. It's been really interesting to see, we all remember when, the air-cooled Porsches from the 60s were white hot several years ago in particular, and even those are cooling off a little bit in favor of this new generation of buyer who wants something a little more drivable, dare I say, something a little bit more modern. And, if you were a kid in the 90s, the poster on your wall was like maybe a Ferrari F50 or maybe a Lamborghini Diablo. It wasn't an air-cooled Porsche or a Corvette or a Ferrari from the 50s. It was, you were lusting after the Italian exotics. So, yeah, we are really
Miami Vice. It was a whole different thing.
Oh, my God. Well, you can read all about the specifics and what did sell too and some of the numbers and go really through it. Just check out Hannah's column. You can find it on the Bloomberg and also at Bloomberg.com. Our thanks to Bloomberg News auto columnist Hannah Elliott, also co-host of the podcast Hot Pursuit, and the editor of Bloomberg Pursuits, as always, our Chris Rouser. And that wraps up the weekend edition of Bloomberg Business Week from Bloomberg Radio. Thank you so much for joining us. And a quick programming note. If you're listening to us in Boston, our new home, starting September 3rd, will be 92.9 FM. That's the day after Labor Day. Once again, Bloomberg Radio moving to 92.9 FM in Boston. I'm Carol Massar along with Tim Stenovec. Have a great and safe weekend, everyone.
This is the Bloomberg Business Week podcast, available on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Listen live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern on Bloomberg.com, the iHeartRadio app, TuneIn, and the Bloomberg Business App. You can also watch us live every weekday on YouTube and always on the Bloomberg Terminal.